I think the first thing we'll do here in this segment is talk about some individuals and athletes and coaches and administrators. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is our first Jorgensen reunion. I think we had 5 or 6 of them, and the guys would come back to DeKalb. And here you have, well, maybe it's 2.5 men. We've got Bud Nangle, the legend, Tom Jorgensen, who probably, along with John McDougall, is the best basketball coach ever to be at Northern Illinois, and this guy right here. We all had a lot of fun at these. Our last Jorgie reunion was about 5 years ago. Tom Jorgensen had Alzheimer's, and he remembered all of us, but he was kind of fading away. But it was fun, and we had guys coming from Denver and California, and it was a lot of fun. Jorgie, and again, you know, the connections between NIU and DeKalb and Mount Prospect. Going back to my high school days, there was a kid from Prospect, much younger than me, named George Pommy, and he started 3 years on those Michigan teams that won Big Ten titles with Cassie Russell and Bill Bunton. And so on Saturday afternoons, I'd be watching the Big Ten game of the week, and there wasn't 700 basketball games on TV now. And so, wow, there's a guy from my high school, and George, and obviously Jorgensen was an assistant with that Michigan team. And then when Jorgie got the NIU job, which was my freshman year, 66, 67, he was going to bring Pommy to Northern as his freshman coach. But George got the job at Michigan. But I remember my freshman year, again, I was the cross-country guy, and I would hang around the basketball offices because I'm a basketball groupie. And Jorgie said, "Hey, Korcek, tomorrow afternoon we're going up to play Wisconsin-Milwaukee. You want to go on the bus with the team?" And I said, "Sure, Coach." And so I called the sports editor and I said, "Hey, I'll cover the game." So I'm a true freshman covering a Northern Illinois game. And so a lot of those guys on that bus are my friends today. Bill Blaisdell, Aubrey Hawkins, Tom Miller. Tom Miller, you'll see Tom, he still has a crew cut. You'll see him sitting in the Jack Nicholson seats at the Convocation Center every once in a while, and his son is a very successful high school coach, and it's like amazing, these guys that I've known for all these years. Jorgie, I think, had the best combination, and again, he being a Michigan man, he had that polish. He was a former Michigan basketball captain. He knew big-time basketball. He could schedule. I mean, his second year, we're playing Michigan. That was Northern's first year as a Division I program. Tom had a lot of friends. Bill Rafferty, who was working CBS in the Final Four, he was doing the color, and I'm digressing on you, excuse me, stay with me here. Bill Rafferty was doing the color of our 91 NCAA game at Dayton against St. John's. So, you know, you have a meeting with the talent the day before the game, and Bill says to me, "You know Tom Jorgensen?" I go, "Well, yeah, he's one of my best friends, a mentor." He says, "Oh, Jorgie's great." And at that time, Jorgie was a full-time scout in the NBA, and he was a full-time scout with the Orlando Magic and I think the Denver Nuggets. And when he passed a couple of years ago, there were a lot of quotes and texts from a lot of NBA people. But Tom could coach. He could recruit. I mean, he's the guy that recruited Billy the Kid Harris, Jim Bradley, Cleveland Ivy. I mean, being a former public league player himself, we had all this talent coming in from Chicago. Don Russell, Cassie Russell's younger brother. So Tom could coach him up, he could recruit, and obviously he goes from 66, 67, we're college division, so we go from the college division to about 6 years later into the top 20, Division I. And because Jim Bradley was a blue chipper, Billy Harris was a blue chipper. Billy Harris was supposed to go to Kansas, but he It's the other. Yeah, Billy was supposed to go to Kansas when Jim Bradley made one of his first visits, and Billy was a freshman when I was a senior, so that's 69, 70. And Billy could do amazing things. I mean, he handling the ball. It was all this public league stuff. It was the black game. And again, growing up in Mount Prospect, I saw kind of a different game. And so this was kind of diversity. And Billy Harris was doing things with the basketball no one was doing. And that's one of the reasons that Jim Bradley came to Northern. Bradley had like 350 offers. And I remember as a senior in the spring of 1970, Channel 11 WTTW carried the Indiana State Basketball Championship. So I turn on the TV and bingo, I'm watching East Chicago Roosevelt. They were undefeated. They finished like 28, 29-0. And here's the center, the 6'10", 6'8", 6'9" center, Jim Bradley. And I'm going, wow, who is this kid? So now let's skip to May 1970, and we're in the press box for the football spring game. And Jorgie comes up. We could see him coming up the steps outside in the stands. And he comes in the press box and he says, here's Jim Bradley's national letter of intent. And I go, that Jim Bradley? That's the Jim Bradley. In maybe the late 70s, Steve Nemeth, one of my good friends and my former assistant, we drove to Chicago State to see the Chicago Summer League. And Dr. J, Julius Erving, was supposed to play, and some other NBA guys. And some Northern guys played. Paul Dawkins, Billy the Kid Harris played. Ron Lindfors played. Some funny stories. That was the year that Raymond McCoy came out of Bloom. He was like the top high school player in the city, in the suburbs, and he was going to DePaul. And I hadn't seen Billy. Billy, in the interim, had played. He had gotten cut by the Bulls. He had played in the ABA, and then I think he played in Puerto Rico or the Philippines. Started with P. And then he was hanging around the city, but he could still play. And Billy annihilated this Raymond McCoy kid. I felt sorry for him. Again, Billy had that high dribble right in front of him, and he dared you to take the ball away from him, and he just smoked this kid. And so Steve and I are sitting there, and we might have been, and I'm not trying to be funny or disrespectful, we might have been the only two white people in the entire gym. Probably, summertime, it's hotter than heck, no air conditioning. The gym probably sat 3,500, 4,000 people. I mean, this is free. I mean, like I said, Artis Gilmore of the Bulls played. We went a couple times. So we're sitting there, and there's 2, 3 black teenagers, maybe 13, 14 years old. I didn't know them. I was not wearing any NIU gear, nor was Steve. They had no idea where we were from. We're watching Billy the Kid. And the little kid goes behind me. Wow, that's Billy the Kid. God, is he great. He's super. Yeah, but he's not as good as Brad. Brad is magic. I turn around, who are these kids? I couldn't write that script any better. And it's true, Jim Bradley was the first Magic Johnson. When we upset Indiana in 1972, and I wasn't at the game, but I went back and did some research. I went back and read the Chronicle version of the story and the Tribune version of the story and the Daily News version of the story. Tim Weigel was the guy who did the Daily News story, who later became a TV sports anchor. Jorgie crossed up the great Bobby Knight. And again, it's just like Indiana put a full court press, and Billy Harris or Larry Jackson was very capable of beating the full court press. Jim Bradley at 6'10" brought the ball down against the press. And Indiana's big guys, Joby Wright and Steve Downing, who were good players and played in the NBA, couldn't defend Bradley. Bradley had 24 points and 20 rebounds in what was a great game. Let's go down the list here, and I guess you have to start with Chick Evans, and I was fortunate enough. Chick retired in '68, and so I did an interview in the May Fate issue of the Northern Star. So I'm probably one of the last media people, although albeit I was a student, to interview Chick. But he said some things that register today about NIU athletics, and again, it was his goal and his dream for Northern to be in the Mid-American Conference. We discussed that, and again, we went, back in the days, we were in the Little 19, and, with Wheaton College and Illinois Wesleyan, and I'm not making fun of those schools, but they're not Division I or FBS or Power 5. But it was Chick's dream to get into the he was a very strong personality. I mean, if you talk to Bud, if you talk to Bob Heimerdinger, if you talk to the Bob Brigham, Chick was tough and he was a taskmaster. And again, if we go back, the baby boomer generation, and there was a tough teacher and a tough coach, and it was tough love, and that's what Chick was, tough. But going back to the MAC, he said it's a natural grouping, a geographical grouping. And I think some of these conferences now, I mean, I was in the profession and I have a hard time thinking, West Virginia, wait a minute, they're in the, they're in the Big 12? How did they get in the Big 12? And Missouri is in the SEC? I mean, there's some bizarre things. So, but Chick, very fair man, and again, I think the other thing, that there was a farm system. And, what did NIU produce in the post-war baby boom? And it was a teacher's college from the start. But it's just like, I am willing to bet that 50% of the faculty of Prospect High School in the 60s either had a bachelor's or a master's from Northern Illinois. And so early in my career, we would proofread the rosters, like a football roster. So, you've all seen a roster: number, name, position, height, weight, year, hometown, high school, and then the high school coach. We go down the list here. Sterling High School, Joe Blow. Bubba go, see Joe Blow? He played football here. He was one of Chick's guys. He sent that kid here. And it was like a farm system. Okay, if you had a good player and he could play in the Big Ten, no. But if you had a kid that might have been marginal, hey, we'll coach him up, and that was the farm system. And I think we've lost a little bit of that, and we're still producing coaches and teachers. And again, I'm not trying to be critical, but it's just like if we've kind of lost that influence. Bob Brigham, I call the favorite son because he was groomed to be Chick's successor. And Bob just passed away, but I think here's a man, and of course Chick was AD from 1929 to 1968. Think about that. Bob was AD from 68 to 87, and that's you're not going to see people, you're going to have changes every 4 or 5 years. That just seems to be the nature of the current setup in college athletics. But Bob had been a successful athlete here. He held the school record, single game, season, and career rushing records in football. He rushed for 242 yards against Washburn of Kansas, and he was hurt. He wouldn't come out of the game, but we had a ball control offense, and Bob was seriously injured, and he was never the same after that with the knee injury. But he and Bud were very close friends, and of course I was privy to a lot of things because Dr. Brigham would come in the office and he and Bud would close the door and they'd laugh, they'd yell at each other, but they were good friends. And again, Bob is very instrumental. And when Bud retired, Bob and Susie Jones, they were the people that hired me as Bud's successor. So I'm very happy there. But Bob deserves all the recognition, and of course the current athletes this year, since Bob died last spring, they wear a little black circle with the initials RJB, Robert J. Brigham, and I think that's a very nice touch by Sean Fraser, and appropriate. You got to keep your your heritage alive. I would say the greatest athlete, and this is just my opinion, the greatest athlete in the first 50 years of Northern Illinois is a DeKalb native, Reno Nori. Reno Nori, and again, this wasn't happening, and it's just like three sport, when we were in high school, oh yeah, this guy's a football, basketball, baseball guy. Well, now the kids specialize, and they play their one sport all year round. I think some of the kids are getting burnt out, and I think part of the charm of being a three-sport athlete or a multi-sport athlete is learning the nuances of different sports and at the same time staying in shape. Reno Nori lettered a school record 17 times in 5 sports in 4 years. That is utterly amazing. He's our first NFL player. There used to be a Chicago Tribune College All-Star game. He was the first Northern alum to play in that. And I think probably the neatest story, and I was doing some research in the 1930s, I was in the Regional History Center, and I was looking at either the Chronicle or the Northern Illinois, which is the precursor to the Northern Star. And it was a little story and the agate summary of a track meet against the University of Chicago. Well, let's put this in context. The University of Chicago in the 30s is a Big Ten athletic power. They're in the Big Ten. They had football. Northern Illinois in the 30s is in the Little 19. Now, there were as many as 26 schools in the Little 19. So the Big Ten, which calls itself the Big Ten and has 14 schools, it's amazing. These academicians don't know how to count, but I'm digressing. But anyway, so you have an athlete. So there's the broad jump. Excuse me, that's what it was called. It's the long jump now. And here's the agate summary. It says broad jump, tie, Reno Nori, NISTC in parentheses, Northern Illinois State Teachers College, and Jay Berwanger, UC. Jay Berwanger was the first recipient of the Heisman Trophy. And bingo. Now, Bud used to call it fame by association. You have a Northern Illinois athlete and a Big Ten athlete, the first recipient, and they tie. This may not mean anything. To me, it means Reno Nori was a heck of an athlete. And again, we can't forget things like that. LaShawn Johnson. We showed you the picture earlier, and I think he's one of the best modern athletes. And the reason, I think, because of his accomplishments, and my God, I was so thrilled for Jordan Lynch that he went to New York and he finished third in the Heisman. I mean, from a mid-major school, my hat is off to him, to Rod Carey, the football program, to Donna Turner, my successor as SID. But LaShawn Johnson should have went to New York. He's the national rushing champion with the 4th highest total at that time. He was 24 yards short of 2,000 yards. He was unanimous first-team All-America. Jordan Lynch, I think, made like 2 All-America teams. And again, I'm not being critical. Do not misunderstand. I'm a Northern Illinois guy. LaShawn made first-team AP, UPI, Football News, football coaches. There's like about 8 teams. I mean, at the glamour position of football, tailback, on a team that was 4-7 with no television. You can look it up. There was no TV games that year. And Northern, starting in the mid-'80s, was starting to do games on TV, on Sports Vision or Sports Channel. The Cal Bowl in '83 was the first ESPN game. But it's like LaShawn. And, he had a couple 300-yard games. He had like about 305, 306 at Iowa, the last game of the season. And that's the game that propelled him over the deal. You can have a good PR guy, but when you get 300 yards against a Big Ten team, and I think Iowa finished 6-5 that year, and they went to a bowl. But the key is that the coach at Iowa was the chair of the Football Coaches Association. And he said after the game, this is one of the greatest running backs I've ever seen. it was ironic that the Iowa radio broadcaster, Ed Podolak, who played at Iowa and played for the Chiefs in the NFL, and he said in the pregame, because I was on the pregame show, they always have the visiting SID, and he says, well, I hear LaShawn Johnson's pretty good, but he's not Tyrone Wheatley, who was probably the best and best known running back in the Big Ten that particular year. It was 93. After the game, after 306 yards, and Iowa won, but LaShawn, like I said, had like 5 touchdowns and 306 yards. It was one against 11, and I was checking all the booths if the guys had everything before I left, and I heard the post-game show, and Podolak said, Tyrone Wheatley can't hold LaShawn Johnson's jack, and that's a heck of a quote. So LaShawn, great kid too, very talented kid. I remember we're practicing on the field west of the stadium where they park now. And again, this is in August of 93, and older photographer from the Tribune came. And Bud had always told me, Mike, be careful with photographers. And again, I understand still photo guys, video guys, they're focused in and they can't see. I mean, they are focused in on the action and they can't see. One year we had 2 AP photographers break their legs because they weren't paying attention and somebody rolled off the sideline and bingo. And they were older guys. So this guy is standing like we're a middle linebacker. And Charlie Sadler was our coach, the photographer. And I said, I don't think you should do that. Hey, Charlie, Mike, get him out of there. LaShawn's going to run him over. And LaShawn in practice, he was probably in the best shape of any tailback we had. He would run everything to the end. So and he missed this guy. I mean, LaShawn would have killed this photographer. But he wanted to get him, the picture of him in practice, breaking through the hole. And again, I understand the artiste and the whole thing. I'm thinking liability and lawsuits, and we're lucky LaShawn didn't kill that guy. Garrett Wolf. Garrett, as you get older and you develop more clout, I guess, with media people, and we had never had anyone make the preseason Playboy All-America football team. And I knew the sports editor of Playboy, and there's a job. There's a job. You think I had it easy, Toy Department of Life. There was a guy, Gary Cole, and he's a wonderful man and did Northern and me a lot of favors, but my job is the sports editor of Playboy. Wow. We got invited, and, LaShawn didn't make it, Michael Turner didn't make it, Mark Keller didn't make it, and I kept my cool. But finally, I think Gary realized, there's been a succession of NIU running backs. Let's get Garrett on the preseason team. So Garrett is the only mid-major player. So the shoot was in Phoenix, so it was like during spring break, so it's colder than heck here. They paid for it. Garrett and I met at Midway. They flew us to Phoenix. There's a limo waiting for us. It's like they picked up our luggage. We're at this resort. It's like, holy cow. There's no bunnies. I'm sad to tell you. There's no funny stuff. But here's Garrett. And again, when you're a mid-major, and I dealt with guys at Ohio State and Michigan and the U of I and, every school in the country. But it's just like, well, I'm at Northern Illinois. I'm you're a little defensive. So before we left, I asked Coach Novak, I said, Joe, how close do you want me to monitor Garrett? He says, Mike, Garrett's responsible. Just make sure he represents the program and the institution properly and whatever. But he says, I'll tell you one thing. And if you remember, Garrett had these little, I think they were fake diamond stud earrings. He says, if I see a picture or a video, I'm going to kill you with him wearing those. And I said, okay. So it's the first day, and the photo sessions were in a big ballroom. There was a video thing and a still photo thing. And They had a green thing, so they could fudge the background. And Garrett was second up. So he's getting dressed. So we shipped full uniform, the helmet, the shoulder pads. And now he's getting dressed with the guys. And these are his peers. And there are guys from Ohio State and Michigan and West Virginia and all the major schools in the country. And I'm thinking, I'll be damned if I'm going to go over and say, hey, Garrett, take off those studs. And the guy from Texas, the Ohio State, who I knew, Steve Snap, and I said, Steve, how many of these things you've been to? And of course, Ohio State, and this is the real world and the perspective. Ohio State's Ohio State. I said, how many of these Playboy shoots have you been to? He says, 12. 12. This is my first one, and I'm going to retire. But anyway, I was talking to Steve, next thing I know, here is Garrett in front of me. And he says, he's got his fist like this in front of me. He says, Mr. Korcek, will you take care of these? And here are the 2 diamond studs. And it's just like, what a great kid. And we had a great time. And it was a nice trip. And Garrett, I understand he just got his master's, and he's going to have a successful career. Kenny Battle, the king of the 360s. Here's another one where when the dunk got legalized they banned the dunk because of Lou Alcindor, and they thought it was an unfair advantage. Well, they created a monster because he developed that sky hook and an all-around game, and so it kind of backfired. But the dunk was banned from, I think, 67, 68 until Matt Hicks's senior year, which was 76, 77. And Matt took advantage of it, and he had a great thing. But I kept track of dunks, and I was a typical white guy tweener, 6'1". I might have get about this far over the rim. I couldn't palm the ball. I could dunk a volleyball, but I couldn't do a basketball. It was rare. But I loved dunking, and I understood the psychological effects of it. So all of a sudden, here comes Kenny Battle, who dunked everything. In 2 years, he had 93 dunks. And so I forget the year. It might have been his freshman year. And he had a couple 360s where you take off and you turn your body a full 360 and then dunk it. And it was on one of our TV games. So I went to media services, and I think it was Brad Hoy. Oh, Brad, I want a copy of that dunk and a few of the others. So we sent it to CBS. And now we get a call, Mike, there's going to be a feature on Kenny Battle at the halftime of the Duke something game. And I'm thinking, at the halftime of the Duke? I mean, Duke is like the elite. And sure enough, who is doing it? Who's narrating it but Brent Musburger? And Brent has done us several favors over the year, and I remind people all the time that his first job out of Northwestern was being the sports editor of the DeKalb Daily Chronicle. In our old files, he went from the Chronicle to Chicago's American, and there was a big story that he had done on George Bork because he was here when Bork was an underclassman from the Chicago American. But anyway, the highlight from the 360 against Eastern Michigan comes on, and Brent Musburger goes, he's the king of the 360s. It's just like, thank you, Brent. And we used that for the next year and a half. And when we beat Wisconsin in football in '88, Brent was doing the NFL Today pregame show. And so I would usually get in the office on Sundays, 10 or 11 in the morning. Sunday morning was my morning off. I did my wash and stuff. And so I'd come in 11, 12 o'clock, and NFL Today's on, and the Bears were going to be on, and I'd had the TV on, and I was updating the stats. And all of a sudden, Brent goes, well, we want to congratulate the Northern Illinois Huskies and Coach Jerry Pettibone for their first win over the Big Ten. It's like, wow. Thank you, Brent. That was awesome. And Kenny Battle. TJ Lux. Here's another one where, again, the seniority and the knowledge of the thing. TJ was a 3-time academic All-American. I mean, he could play and he had the grade points. And the All-America team is sponsored by the College Sports Information Directors of America, which I was a member. And when you look at the ballot and when you see some of these kids and some of these grade points and kids from Notre Dame, kids from Purdue who are nuclear engineering. I mean, I can't even say or spell nuclear. And these kids have 4-point pluses in these academic disciplines. And TJ is competing against them. And his senior year, he was the Academic All-America of the Year. I think I should have gotten a raise, but hey, my job was to place TJ or any of our athletes. And again, there are days you don't have ammunition to give to the media or to other voters, but it's like, wow, it was great. And of course, Tim Dillon was Academic All-America and All-America, and that's a rare double-double. And Gary Cole came to the rescue too, because PJ made the Playboy preseason All-America team, and I didn't go to that one. I don't think there were any bunnies to that one either. But Lux, and of course, we go to the NCAA Lux's freshman year. That's the last time for our men in 1996. And he could not hold down his food. He got some kind of flu. I mean, he was barfing on the bench. I mean, he looked green. And of course, if you remember in 96, we lost to Texas Tech by 1, and they were like a number 5 seed, and we were a number 12 or something. And it's like they didn't give us a chance in heck, and we should. And that was the game that Chris Coleman had a great game. But it's like TJ played. And then the next morning in the airport, and we're all kind of depressed that we lost. And I remember the game after our game, we would have played the winner of New Orleans and North Carolina, and North Carolina was terrible. Don't tell Michael Jordan I said that, but we would have beat either of them. But anyway, we're at the airport, and some of the kids were hungry, and they got some crackers out of a vending machine, and Lux grabbed it. He says, "I think I can hold something down," and he did. But another great kid. He's a very successful coach at his high school now, Merrillville in Indiana. John McDougal. Oh, God, I just went to John. They had a surprise birthday party for him last week in Aurora, and he's 91, still doing pretty good. He has some challenges. Kenny Battle was there, Randy Norman, Rodney Davis, Brad Waller, Tim Dillon, Matt Hicks, Ron Hicks. We had a great reunion, and he was a tremendous coach. And he and Joe Novak, I look at as similar. They're older fellas, they're fundamentalists, they're teachers, they're educators, and they were perfect hires at their time, taking over a program that programs that lack discipline. And John, with the exception of one player, we were 5-21 the year before. And then his first year, we're 13-14, but we were in the MAC race until the middle of February. Our home opener was Wisconsin. We blew out a Big Ten team like 81-57. The Wisconsin coach, Bill Cofield, was so pissed. Can I say pissed? He was so mad, he locked his SID out of the locker room and he wouldn't let the media come in there, but we just smoked them. And I think John could have run for mayor, and it was a great 10 years. Of course, John took us to the NCAA in '82, our first trip. But and of course, like I said, he was fired. And it was kind of a sad ending to a career that probably would have ended 2 years when Kenny graduated. But there's no better X's and O's coach and better basketball guy. Jane Albright. You know, I felt sorry. Jane's program kind of moved up, and Jim Rosborough was the men's coach. And Jim was a good guy, an assistant at Iowa, young coach, had recruited Chicago for Iowa, a lot of players from Iowa. Ronnie Lester, you know, Jim recruited them from the public league and the Catholic league. But the Jane's team just took over the campus. I mean, the ring around the court after the games. I mean, the fans would ring the court after the games, and the team and the coaches and the staff would go around shaking everyone's hand. And, I never thought of this, and all the little girls that were at the games. And it's just like, I didn't go to a college basketball game until I was in college. Yeah, I went to a lot of I take it back. High school, I went to the doubleheader at the Chicago Stadium. But, it's like, here are little girls at that age. I wasn't going to games, and they're looking at Denise Dove. Denise Dove was the blonde, pigtailed, little cute point guard who ran the team. Her father was a high school coach. And I'm watching this after the game. I'm making my calls to the TV stations, and I'm watching the people go around the ring, and the little girls are looking up to Denise, and Denise was like 5'6", but they still had to look up to her. And I had a sister, but I never thought this way. It's like, wow, these little girls, they're 5, 6 years old, they're going, someday when I grow up, I'm going to be the point guard of a basketball team. And it's great. Title IX this is one of the greatest things that the government has done. And there are days that our government does goofy things, but it's like to give women this opportunity, and it's like, wow. But Jane and the players, Carol Owens, Lisa Foss, Tammy Hinchy, from that era, E.C. Hill, Cindy Connor, they're all Hall of Famers. What an era. And again, I think we set the state attendance record for women's basketball. We played DePaul, and what a rivalry that was. And I'll remember the attendance, 6,118. And it's just like, wow. And here, and Jim, they lose Kenny Battle, and they had half the crowds. And it's just like, it was a interesting dichotomy there. I'd have to go back a little ways to Howard Fletcher. He was a visionary, the head coach of football, and of course he coached that 63 team, and he was way ahead of his time. And Chick was way ahead of his time. Chick liked to throw the ball too, but Fletch took it to the next level. And when you think about it, Bork was the first quarterback in the history of college football, any level, Division I, Division II, Division III, to throw for 3,000 yards in a single season. It was 3,077, and then you didn't count the bowl games in your statistics. There was a game against Central Michigan. George completed 43 of 68 passes. This is back in the early 60s where you hand the ball off. Every once in a while, you throw a pass. And Northern is just filling the air. 5 receivers zigzagging down the field. Northern led the country in total offense. Okay, it was college division, but it's just like they were doing. There was a 4-page story about Bork in Sports Illustrated. Fletch used to correspond with Tom Landry, and of course Tom Landry was the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys on the passing game, and there'd be clinics where Fletch would run reverses on kickoff returns. And, you might have a bunch of high school coaches, and they'd laugh. You can't do that. And Fletch did it. I was talking to Jack Dean, another DeKalb product in our Hall of Fame, and he says, Mike, I used to show some of those films when I was the head coach at Eastern Illinois. It's like people would laugh, and I said, you guys don't get it. These things would work. And Fletch, I remember the day Fletch resigned. I was the sports editor that year in '68, and they finished 2-8 that year. And he was all dressed up. I'm a dumb kid, and he says, Mike, I'll see you this afternoon. And then we got the phone call that there was a press conference, and he had resigned. But great coach, great man, great educator. He later moved into compliance after coaching, and one day I was in his office, and he says, Mike, you see this? And I think I held up the NCAA rule book earlier, and he said, see this? This book gets thicker and thicker. And this is like in the early 1970s when I had come back from the service. He says, this book gets thicker and thicker because more people, more schools are breaking rules, and it keeps on going. But he was a smart man. probably the best wide receiver we had, John Spillis, and I'm gonna hack off some people. I mean, we've had some great wide receivers, but John Spillis, number 87, 6'4", huge hands. If you've ever met Dr. J, I met Dennis Johnson of the Celtics, and I shook his hand, and my hand got lost, and John had big hands like that, and he could catch the ball, and he could jump. There's a picture in his file of him catching a ball over his head, and he's like about this far off the ground. And he went and played in the All-Star game at Soldier Field. And the All-Star uniforms, it looked like a Captain America's outfit. They had stars and red, white, and blue. And there's a picture of Otto Graham was the head coach. And I went to the practice, and it was neat to meet Otto Graham and neat to see a Northern Illinois athlete in that context. But John Spillis was our highest draft choice for many years until Larry English went in the first round.
About 5 minutes.
All right. I would be remiss if I've mentioned Bork several times, and I wrote a column a couple of years ago when Chandler Harnish was playing, and I said, who's a better quarterback? Who's the best NIU quarterback? And Chandler Harnish was doggone good, and Jordan Lynch, my God. But and again, George Bork played in the college division, but you have to remember, I'm doing a historical context here. And Chandler is still in the NFL. Jordan has gone to the Edmonton Eskimos in the CFL. George Bork is in the College Football Hall of Fame. There's only 2 Northern Illinois athletes in the College Football Hall of Fame, Bork and Tom Beck. And Bork was a 2-sport All-America. He was an All-America in basketball. The same wrist that flicked those passes was also shooting jump shots. So George Bork was a tremendous athlete. The Terwilligers. This is another DeKalb family. Oh, God, I forgot the name. The oldest Terwilliger kid played football. I think it was George, forgive me. He played football in the 1920s. His sister Mary, and again, there was no intercollegiate athletics. There was intercollegiate athletics. If you go back in the early years, in the early 1900s, there was some intercollegiate competition, but it kind of went into a recreational thing, and that's the way it was through the 50s and 60s. But Mary Terwilliger was a great runner, and she read the Tribune and noticed that there was a novice track meet in Chicago. So she borrows a men's sweatsuit. Still Hall was where the locker room was for the men's athletics then. And she borrowed a pair of men's sweats, went into Chicago, and won the 60-yard dash. This was like in late March. By midsummer, she was at the United States Olympic trials, and in 1932, she finished 4th. You had to make the Olympics. The Olympic team, you had to finish in the top 3. She missed. Same thing happened 4 years later in 1936. That was the famous Hitler Olympics in Berlin. She finished 4th. Later, she joined a professional touring track thing with, and if you follow women's athletics, Babe Diedrichson, Tidy Pickett, Stella Walsh, and she was in a pro track circuit, and they had track meets. They had a special indoor track like at the Chicago Stadium, at Madison Square Garden, and when we heard about this, we decided, my God, she has to be in the Hall of Fame. She's a Northern Illinois student. She was a Northern Illinois student and didn't exactly wear the Northern Illinois colors, but she was a Northern Illinois person. And as a selection chair of the Hall of Fame committee at the time, I'm still very proud of that. Her younger brother, Bill was an athlete here in the 40s. Used to run a sporting goods shop next to the McDonald's there on Lincoln Highway. He was probably one of the first Northern athletes to dunk in basketball. He played basketball, and he was a track All-American. In 1942, he was the national AAU decathlon champion. So that might be one of the most athletic families in the history of DeKalb. I'll tell you the last story. It's about the Gullicksons. And Tim and Tom Gullickson were maybe the greatest tennis players here. They were identical twins, and that's the thing to remember. Their freshman year was my senior year, so that's 69-70. They also played basketball. One was right-handed and one was left-handed. To this day, I have to go back in the files. So this also confuses you. They both played and coached at Wimbledon. Tim is deceased. One was the U.S. Davis Cup coach. They are in the Intercollegiate Tennis Association Hall of Fame. They competed in the NCAA championships as a doubles team. But this is like the late 70s when they're on the pro circuit in Europe. And again, they're identical twins. And so there was a European player, and I forget his name, and 1 week he played Tim. The next week he played Tom. And after losing to Tom, he was quoted in the paper saying, "This Gullickson's awful good. Last week he beat me left-handed, and this week he beat me right-handed." And those are the kind of stories that I could go on forever. I could probably do another hour, but I've probably overstayed my welcome. But I've had a wonderful time in DeKalb, and I have memories to last 3 lifetimes. And every time I go to a game, I was at a basketball game this year, and I run into Larry Gentry and Larry Wiley, who played in the basketball here in the 50s. Larry Wiley scored 53 points in one game all by himself, and that's the school record. He just retired. He was the superintendent of the Lincoln Way High School District. But the fun for me, football game, I'll walk through the tailgate area, and I'll see tons of former football players, or I'll see some of my former assistants or coaches, and so I guess I'm a Husky, and I grew up in Mount Prospect, but I'm a DeKalbite.